We now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Denison.
Good morning, Deputy Speaker. Look, it goes without saying, Deputy Speaker, that everyone in this House is focused on national security, and everyone in this House is doing everything they humanly can to enhance our national security. Yes, we all approach it from different places and look at it through different coloured glasses. But I would just like to say quite clearly that the member for Eden Monero's comments were justified. It was a deeply offensive comment, and there have been other deeply offensive comments made over time when it comes to some people criticising other people in this place when it comes to national security. In fact, I haven't done the numbers exactly, but I think there'd be as many or more former members of the military and the intelligence and security services serving in the current opposition and on the crossbench than there are in the government. That's not a criticism of the government, it is just to give a sense of balance, that we've all got our heart in it and we should keep the discussion about policy issues respectful. I myself, some people see me as a bit of a dove, but I did more than 20 years in the military and intelligence services as well. So even though I am not supportive of this bill, let's all just respect each other's position and where we're coming from, please. I share the concern of many people, not so much in this place, but many people in the community, Deputy Speaker, that it is a bad idea to be building a known vulnerability into encryption software. Not necessarily because we have concerns about that access into encrypted communications for government, but although there are legitimate concerns about that to be had, but the broader concern that to design a weakness, a vulnerability, a backdoor, some way to access encrypted communications in all communications, it is such an invitation to wrongdoers to find the key to that door and to eavesdrop effectively or to see in plain text what people thought was a secure communication. So I think that's the first point to make, Deputy Speaker, that I think it's a bad idea to, by law, require all of the encrypted communications in this country to have a vulnerability by design that can be exploited by wrongdoers. And of course, having that within our own country might be something we accept. Governments, and clearly the government and the opposition do accept, and I suspect they're going to vote together on this bill shortly. But it does raise a question: what will our security partners and our business partners think of that? And I think it is a reasonable conclusion to draw that there will be concern in other countries and in multinational businesses who have operations in Australia, the fact that they will then be partners with a country that has this vulnerability within our ICT. So, that's another thing that needs to be considered. So I think this bill is ill-considered, and I'll be one of, I suspect, a small number of people who will oppose it. There is a broader issue, Deputy Speaker, and that is about the power of the state. And I've spoken about this on many occasions, and I have expressed the concern of a great many Australians that the power of the state has now grown and been extended so far in this country as to be unacceptable. In fact, since the 9/11 terrorist attacks, 2001, there have been, now it's well more than 60 security reforms go through this place, and I understand that when you include security reforms at the state level, there have literally been hundreds, many hundreds, of changes to our security legislation, principally, it is said, to deal with the threat of terrorism. Now, Deputy Speaker, I acknowledge some of those reforms have been sensible, and we should be always reviewing our security arrangements, and we should always be looking to improve them where they need to be improved. But there is a widespread concern in the community that some or many of those reforms have not been well considered, have not been justified. In fact, you could even go back to the very start of those shocking events in 2001, when there were the terrorist attacks in the US. I mean, I think our whole response was wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, that was a shocking criminal act of mass murder. And really, that should have been our response way back then. We shouldn't have been racing around the world invading countries. We should have been treating it as a terrible criminal matter. And if we need to enhance our legislation to help the crime busters, then let's do that. But let's not overextend. Let's not unnecessarily extend the power of the state. And I'm pleased, Deputy Speaker, that some people have reminded us of the issue of mandatory metadata retention. I'll take this opportunity to make the point again. That was a bad idea. That is bad policy. The fact that every piece of metadata that is collected by an Australian telco must be kept for 2 years and can be accessed without merit. I mean, there's no comfort in that. I mean, I probably would have had a different response to mandatory metadata retention personally if I had known at least that it could only be accessed with a warrant, and no, it's not. So there is that issue that the power of the state has already been extended greatly, in the minds of many people, extended way beyond what has been necessary. And when I wrap that context around what's going on here today, I think this is another case of an excessive extension of the power of the state. And it's another case, Deputy Speaker, of the government and the alternative government being in lockstep. I think one of the characteristics of a healthy democracy is we have a strong and ethical, competent government, and we have a tough opposition that holds the government to account. It doesn't oppose for opposition's sake, which is far too often the case in this country these days, or in recent years, but holds the government to account when it needs to be held to account. And far too often, in fact almost always, Deputy Speaker, when it comes to issues of national security and the response to irregular immigration, I would add, far too often whoever's in the opposition, whether it be the Coalition or the Labor Party, will just say yes. You know, where's the blank cheque? We'll sign it for you. And far too often it's out of fear of being wedged. And Deputy Speaker, I do wonder, in fact, if bringing this on at this point in time, the encryption bill, bringing it on after 18 months of it wallowing around the parliament, to bring it on now in the lead up to a federal election, I do wonder why the haste and to what degree this is a political move to bring it on right now, and was it actually in the hope of wedging the Labor Party? Well, you know what, I wish the Labor Party had been wedged on it, because they shouldn't be supporting it. And I think the Labor Party is letting down many of their supporters by getting behind this bill. Deputy Speaker, I'd also make the observation that, I mean, yes, you know, when you're in government, you do need to be responsive to the needs of the security services. You should ask them, you know, what tools do you need? You know, how much money, what resources, what legislative freedom and manoeuvre? What do you need to do your job? And that's good. We ask them and we listen to them. But we should never just say yes to every request, because you know, it's in the nature of the security services to ask for every possible tool they can get their hands on, to the point where they would have way more than is in the public interest if you gave them everything they want. So sometimes in this place we've got to be prepared to say no. And look, I mean, sure, you know, if the security services are able to access any and all encrypted communications, I agree, that will help the security services. But at what point do you rein them in and say, you know, you're asking for too much? You are asking us to extend the power of the state beyond what is reasonable. You know, I mean, if you gave the security services everything they want, they'd probably have rockets and missiles and be able to do who knows what. You've got to rein them in. That's our job. Our job is just as much to be a check on the power of our security services as it is to give them the tools they need. And I do worry that in this country nowadays, governments, supported by the opposition, Deputy Speaker, are too quick to give the security services everything they want. You know, it's telling, Deputy Speaker, that several years ago now, I gave a speech in here and I lamented that Australia had entered a stage of being almost in a pre-police state, with excessive powers of the state, with excessive legislation, having gone too far. For example, the fact that mandatory metadata can be accessed without warrant. I was really genuinely alarmed a little bit earlier in this debate, Deputy Speaker, to hear that councils in Australia, local government, are now accessing, or at least seeking to access that metadata. Well, when we promised only several years ago now, when we promised that it would be only used to go after terrorists, and the agencies that would be allowed to use that information would be a very small list. In fact, the list was being reduced in size about the organisations. So I remember at the time we were wondering, why does the RSPCA have access, before it was mandatory, had access to metadata years ago, and we were having, I think, a healthy debate, Deputy Speaker, about who should access this sort of stuff. And we were absolutely promised it would only be to go after terrorists. And then after a while the debate morphed into, oh yeah, but also pedophiles and other things. The problem with these sorts of reforms is incrementalism. And things are, they're rolled out with lots of promises and grand speeches, but over time security services want just a bit more, other agencies want just a bit more, ministers just give out a bit more, and you end up in a bad place. And I do worry about this access to encrypted material. We're saying it's only for, I think it's the government saying it's only to assist in the fight against terrorism and the most serious of crimes like child exploitation, paedophilia and so on. And yes, they are heinous crimes. But I don't have any confidence, Deputy Speaker, that next year it will also be for this and that, and the year after it'll be for that and that and that and that. And before we know it, family law lawyers will be wanting access to information, whether it be metadata or access to what we thought were secure communications between two parties. And then local governments will be wanting access to it, and all these other agencies will be wanting access to it. And there'll be people in civil law courts will be wanting access to it. The idea of a slippery slope isn't just a cliche, Deputy Speaker. It's real. Now, as the Attorney General is leaving, I'll say through you, Deputy Speaker, to him, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think the Attorney General's a decent man, and he's not prone to acting recklessly, except in the probable case of Witness K and Bernard Cleary, and I still don't know why we're going after those two. But what happens when, in a future government, we have a really nasty piece of work or a real fool in a position like that? We need laws to be really tight to protect us from people in the future. Laws should never be rolled out on the assumption that they will never be misused. Any opportunity to misuse, any hole in it should be closed before we bring it into law. Deputy Speaker, why the rush? Why the rush? These ideas have been, as I said earlier, have been washing around Parliament for about 18 months, I think it is. But all of a sudden, we have to get it through the Parliament today. We have to have it in place before Christmas. Why the rush? If nothing else, why can't we just delay this and look at it further, consult more broadly and put in place more safeguards? That would keep some members of the community happy. Although I come back to my original concerns, Deputy Speaker, and that is that it's just fundamentally a bad idea to build into encrypted systems a backdoor, because it is an inherent vulnerability that, mark my word, Deputy Speaker, people will search for that backdoor and some very clever people will find it and they will access it, and then once they've found the key, they'll sell it to someone else. It'll become a very valuable commodity, and before we know it, encryption will be, it'll be no secret what's being said for the wrongdoers and perhaps the criminals and perhaps the terrorists, and it'll be used against us, and it will make us less safe. And it will be because of a government, this opposition, seeking to extend the power of the state just that bit further, and frankly, Deputy Speaker, to take us that bit closer to a police state. Because in so many ways, Deputy Speaker, we already have reached a pre-police state. too many laws, too much power for the state, too much power for the security services. I'll be opposing this bill today. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.